Hi, this is Mike Dierks, Regional Home Missionary Coordinator, Presbytery of Ohio. And this is the September 2023 edition of our videos. And today we have the pleasure of having Reverend Jeremiah Montgomery with us, who is the soon-to-be new General Secretary of the Denominational Home Missions Committee. So Jeremiah, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be with you, brother.
Yeah, let's start by just introducing yourself to the churches. Many of us in the presbytery know you, but tell us your story, how you got to the seat that you're in now.
Okay, well, I grew up in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. My parents joined the denomination when I was probably about a year and a half old. I was baptized at that time and spent my whole life as a member of the OPC. I went to seminary in 2008 and then became a church planter at State College, Pennsylvania. Was there for about 6 years. And then our family was called by the denomination's Committee on Foreign Missions to serve overseas for a couple of years. After doing that, we had hoped to be there long term. Some medical things prevented that. We came back from there, from being overseas, and then we were called to come to Ohio. And since January 2020, I've been serving as one of the co-pastors here at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Vandalia. A couple months ago in May, the Committee on Home Missions and Church Extension of the denomination issued a call for me to become the next General Secretary of that committee after John Shaw completes his work at the end of this year. So that's a brief snapshot.
Very good. Real quick, your family, wife's name, kids, ages?
Right, yes, of course. Sorry, yeah. My wife is Beth. We've been married for 21 years. We have 5 children, ages 19 down to 11, 4 boys and then a girl.
Very good. Well, thank you. So now, you haven't sat yet in the seat of General Secretary, but as you kind of think about where home missions is heading, I mean, we see a culture that, as John Shaw and I talked about last month, it's no longer a culture that understands basic Christianity. Sure. But the gospel stays the same. So how do you see this playing out as you step into this role?
Yeah, so one of the big challenges that we are facing is that our culture has, over the past century or so, has gone through a serious decline in the matter of biblical literacy. Words, phrases, even biblical concepts that would have been familiar even to unbelievers in the days of my parents, my grandparents. We can no longer assume that those words mean the same things. There's that movie where one guy says, "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means." So that's a big challenge for us. There is a lack of biblical literacy. And what that's going to call us to do is 2 things, I think. We are going to have to begin to make an adjustment in terms of how we, believers and the church, particularly the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, how we view our home culture. And I think we really need to make a shift to seeing our home culture as a mission field, as a cross-cultural field on which we live. And so we need to start learning some of the lessons from foreign missions and bringing those into home missions in terms of thinking through what it means to speak across a cultural divide. It's very interesting, Mike. About a year ago, I read a book on the history of global missions. And one of the things that the author said in the preface was, the greatest border that anybody ever crosses is not the border between North America and Europe or North America and Asia, but it is the border between faith and non-faith. That's the greatest border. And I think we need to bring that insight into everything we do in home missions. Second thing I think is it calls us this new time in which we're living. The gospel doesn't change, God doesn't change, Christ doesn't change, the church doesn't change. But where we need to grow is we need to grow in our gospel fluency, our ability to communicate the gospel in a way that is clear and in a way that we trust will be maximally used by the Spirit to connect and to convert and compel unbelievers. So that's a quick answer, I hope.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I see us, and I've had this conversation with John of needing to learn how to tell stories, parables,
okay,
right? To be able to speak to the heart, because the intellect doesn't get words of faith.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think John's interview when he spoke with you last month, he talked about being able to say, what does Jesus mean for you today? That idea of a today testimony. not simply falling back on sort of a pre-cooked or pre-memorized gospel presentation, which, by the way, is going to use a lot of those concepts and ideas that you can't assume an unbeliever is going to understand. But to have so internalized the gospel, to be so fluent with the gospel in your own life. What does Jesus mean to me today? That I could speak authentically and personally into the life of an unbelieving family member or friend, and really show them how the gospel and how the power of Christ is intersecting with my life now.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
right.
And by the way, that is more of a story, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a story that we have that we then can connect the story to who Christ is.
Exactly.
And,
right.
And, yeah. So good. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. This is short. Just wanted to get an introduction to the churches of this new change, but really a continuity. And I think with your background both in home missions and foreign missions, it'll bring a good challenge to the church. It's something that we need to challenge ourselves constantly. And how do we think in a culture that doesn't understand foundational Christianity? How do we communicate that? How do we reach out? Good. So as we wrap up, Jeremiah, what are two or three things the church can be praying for you particularly, but also just the whole role of the church in home missions?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that question, because I do think both of those things need to be prayed for, right? So certainly we would appreciate the prayers of the churches as we make this transition, as we'll be staying here in the Vandalia area, Dayton area, for about 9 months while one of our sons finishes up high school. Our plan is to relocate to the Philadelphia area where the OPC home offices are next summer, I hope. So prayers for that whole transition, selling a home, buying a home, doing all this kind of remotely, packing, moving. Our children will be changing their school when we move. And so there's a lot of just moving pieces and logistics in terms of our life. And we would certainly appreciate the prayers of the church in that way. Another thing that's going to be new about me taking on this role for our family is I'll be traveling a fair bit. The general secretary and associate general secretary travel quite a bit in order to encourage the whole denomination. That's going to be new for us. So we appreciate the prayers of the churches for that. But another thing, and I'm glad you mentioned it, is I really think that one of the things we ought to be praying for as a whole church is that we would all grow in our capacity to know how the gospel story intersects with our life, and that we would all grow in the opportunity and in the courage to take those prayerful opportunities with the people that God puts in our lives. I think John mentioned this. I probably learned it from the same person that John did. But years ago, I remember one of our OPC church planters saying, we don't really need new contacts. We just need to leverage the contacts that are in our lives. We need to learn to see the people that we're interacting with every day, not as landscape or as machines, but as souls, and be praying for the opportunity to speak to them. And so I think we need to pray that the Lord would build the whole capacity of the whole church, so that we would give others a taste of heaven and give others an invitation to the door, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah, thank you. And I fully concur. And I've added one category to that, because you've got the machine, the landscape, but there's also the movement. People that are in a movement, we sometimes categorize them.
Right.
But they're still individuals with a living soul.
Right. To see people not as abstractions or members of a tribe, but as souls made in the image of God. Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So very good. Well, we'll keep this in prayer. Look forward to further conversations, Jeremiah. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mike.